So studying fair language using AI and NLP way before ChatGPT is my very modest way of introducing Kalika. Thanks for being here. Thanks Kalari and thanks Tai for putting this together. And let's get heads on to it. There is an AI divide today, especially as we start scaling AI applications. And as AI builders, it's something we need to address. So why do you think this marginalization exists, and how is it going to impact the fact that systems may not be usable?
Yeah, so I think everybody has heard all the various speakers before. So why this marginalization exists and why the gaps exist has a lot to do with data. The kind of data that most models are trained on is very normative. So, if you start at the very core, maximum amount of data is probably from, a very Western-centric, I would even go so far as to say, white male data or the things that they are interested in. And then as you keep expanding the thing, that the data gets thinner and thinner and thinner by the time we reach some of the communities in the global south, including our country. So if you don't have the data for that particular language or for that particular community or that particular task, AI is not going to do really very well, and that's where the gap really exists.
Agreed. So it's not just rich versus poor, but there's also this other end, right? So there is Gen AI users versus non-users, or in maybe young adapters versus people who are not using it because of trust, accessibility, whatever. How do you see that side impacting inclusion?
Yeah, so that's actually a very important question that gets lost in the whole inclusivity discussion, which is that, how much, it's not just like what AI can do for you, but also how you can use AI to make things happen for you. And that part doesn't get discussed as often. Do we have the literacy? Do we have the capacity amongst the users? Whether they are like, end users, lay people, or even more sophisticated users. Like, what is the capacity that we've built in on the user end of things to be able to use these devices? And I mean, like a very simple example of this would be, somebody earlier talked about how their users are pretty aware that this is a bot, and they're not like really bothered. But I can give you an example. In a tier 2 city, women in tier 2 city using certain applications actually thought that, these things were real, actual human beings. And the consequence of that is not just that they are no longer capable of using the technology effectively, but also that they are vulnerable to a lot of scams, which can be actually harmful at the end.
Should we be explicit about it or not? So should an AI system always tell people that it's an AI system?
I believe there has to be some transparency. I believe it also depends on, like, your user group. Who are you actually catering to? If you're building like a enterprise level solution, probably not. But if you're building something for patients at a hospital, probably yes, right? Like, so it does vary according to context, but I firmly believe that you should be transparent about the fact that you're using an AI, because otherwise it can lead to consequences that you might not desire.
Yeah, so basically transparency, and we can choose the degree of transparency based on the use case that you go with. So you talked about an example where people are vulnerable, right? So let's imagine that we end up, unfortunately, with biased or marginalized AI at scale. What kind of economic disparity it may lead to? So do you think there'll be kind of completely new access gaps that will come up? Do you think whole groups of people will be like secluded from AI economy? Where do you see that kind of a loophole?
Yeah, so you know, as we've discussed before, like we don't really live in a very equitable society in any case, right? Nowhere in the world, definitely not in this country. And I personally view, you know, for the first time that AI does have the potential, and I'm just saying potential, which is not proven yet, to kind of, you know, I won't say even bridge the gap, because bridging happens when you're kind of overcome the thing, but at least like, you know, reduce the gap um, that exists. Now, just think of the fact, like we've heard so many stories about how AI is being used to economically disrupt a lot of industries, right? Right from very big core industries like manufacturing, up right up to like, you know, more simple entertainment or simplistic educational thing. Now, if AI is not, if we do not pay attention to the bias in AI, then clearly we are actually going to be excluding a lot of these groups from any access to the technology. Not only that, that there's a problem with access. It actually may not even work very well for people who have access, right? So an example would be like a language which is not even represented, right? So you're actually excluding all the speakers of that language, right? But if you have some healthcare technology, diagnostic technology, which does not include data from Indian women. So even if Indian women use it, it would not be adequate. It would probably throw up much more, you know, false results, and it won't work as effectively for them. So it's as simple as that.
Absolutely. So you actually are starting to define inclusion, right? So what you are saying is that inclusion may not be just language. It includes culture, nuances, identities, obviously applications, use cases. Someone already talked about verticalization. Um, today, like in my view, today's AI still does take a cookie cutter approach, and that's where we are failing. How are we going to come out of that?
So there are lots of ways we can come out of that, but you know, all of them can, some of them can be very expensive. But the least we can do is let at least understand what we are going to use the AI model for, what our application use case scenario is, and understand what our you know, user base wants. And if you cannot, if your model is not able to fulfill the user's needs, then it is up to you as a developer of that technology to make sure that, you know, you do things on top. You know, so I always say that fairness is a pipeline, or equity is a pipeline, where there are certain things that you can obviously do at the model end, but no model is ever going to be perfectly fair and perfectly comprehensive. Like that's a kind of a tech utopia that we are not living in. You can do things at, of course, like data level, but you can also do things at the post-training level, like, you know, do some kind of a fine-tuning with the data. But then there are things that you can do at an application level as well. But all that requires a deeper understanding of what your user base actually needs and how inclusive you are towards your user base.
Agreed. So there is this whole, let's say we have these pipelines, we'll address systematic biases, right? So we'll talk about data and try to correct it, put in fancy math and do post-training and whatnot. What happens to all the biases that sit inside your pre-trained data, right? So she is a nurse, he is a doctor, and it's a classic early transformer examples, and all of us have written super cool papers around it. But how do we deal with that? Because your human race is reinforcing the bias because of the lack of inclusion, and that's a cycle. So how do we break that barrier?
So it's very difficult to kind of go and retrain such a large model, right? Like even if you realize that probably it has some systemic biases inbuilt. And currently some of the things that people are using, the techniques people are using are, like you said, like, you know, some kind of a post-training fine-tuning, but then also some kind of I would say guardrails kind of situations where you, have guardrails which kind of prevent the model from giving those kind of answers. And everything else right now is being tackled at the application level. So you basically are some probabilistic, but basically hard-coded things at the application level which prevent this happening. So I think that's the way currently we are dealing with things. It's a very open area for people to work on.
Yeah, so my take on that is smart engineering will survive, especially through the whole transition of AI systems maturing, and probably even beyond that. I want to address something that is very loosely used by non-tech folks also, like hallucinations, right? The whole world uses the word hallucination, and there is a very key role of hallucination in here, right? And why does it matter, especially not not from a technical perspective saying, hey, I don't know how to make the model say what I want it to, but more from basic society trust side of things. Your users are worried. And how do you address that?
So, as someone who's worked in language technology for more decades than she can care to remember, I would like to say that this is like, this user trust thing is a very big issue. And it was always a reason why language technology did not take off till it was almost nearly perfect, right? Because people would use it and say, oh, but this did not recognize me saying whatever that I was saying. And so this is useless, so I'm not going to use this anymore. So there was this entire cycle that happened, more than a decade or so ago. But currently we are in a hype cycle. So people are like most willing to make excuses for AI. So every time I say that, it doesn't work for, say, for example, language X that well, someone will come and say, but I used it for language X and it gave me the perfect response. So I think one of the main things that we do require, which we haven't really got a hang of till now, is how do we evaluate, across tasks, across applications, across languages, across use cases, how do we actually rigorously evaluate how well these systems are doing, right? So that's the piece that and there cannot be earlier evaluation things do not work, right?
So precision recall doesn't make sense.
No, precision recall makes zero sense right now. And plus the fact that if you have a benchmark and you test the AI on it, that's useless, right? If you've tested the model once, the model knows the benchmark. It's like, handing out the question paper and then retesting everybody on the same question paper, after they've had a chance to go and look up the answers. So that doesn't really work. And I think, a part of, so it seems like I'm digressing, but a part of what you said was really, I keep coming back to community and users. So how do we evaluate, even for hallucinations, who decides it's a hallucination, right?
Yeah, so is it the right way to say that instead of having very rigid evaluation, we would rather talk about accountability?
Yes.
Or attribution?
Yes, exactly.
And who's accounted?
So that's a very difficult question, and the one that we grapple a lot with. Even some of the work that I do some policy work with METI, and this is a question in governance that we really grapple with, that who's accountable? Is it the model builders who are accountable? Is it the developers who are accountable? Is it the, consumers?
Or in fact the policymakers?
Yeah, or the policymakers. And I think again, and this might not be a very satisfying answer, again, it really does depend on the context. And, there is definitely a thought process that customers or users are definitely less accountable, especially since they're not experts, they don't know what is happening. And there is less transparency on what the systems can or cannot do. And though this might sound really scary, but to the audience here. But there is a feeling that developers have to be more responsible because ultimately it's their solution that's going out there.
Yeah, I think the users knowing that the AI will learn from what they're doing is also important because
Yeah.
that's your
That's a whole-
consumers.
That's a whole transparency piece,
Yeah.
right? Like trust is based on transparency, or we associate certain brands, so with
Yeah.
trust.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we are out of time, and I'm sure we can go on forever. But thanks for being direct. And like the takeaway for me is obviously builders are accountable, developers are accountable, but for a user, they have to be very aware of the fact that just like a child learns based on what you are telling them, the AI today is going to learn on everything that you are telling them, and that will maybe increase or decrease the inclusivity.
At the end, just like to give a car analogy. My favorite analogies are related to cars. So here's the thing, right? Like if you're driving a car, as a user, as a driver of the car, there are certain things that you're accountable for: following the traffic rules, pressing the brake at certain time, etc., to or pressing the accelerator, etc. But somebody has to tell you that these are the things that you have to do, right? They have to tell you what the traffic rules are, how to turn right, how to turn left, etc., etc. So that's one part of the analogy. Of course, like accountability, sorry. But of course, like the people who are building the engine also have to have certain accountability on how, if they're saying that the engine is this horsepower or whatever, then they have some things that say that it is actually that horsepower. But ultimately, if your engine fails, it's the car company that's going to be recalling the cars, right? So that's why the bulk of the thing rests on the developers.
Yeah, it's the AI builders, especially I think for the next decade at least. Thanks for that, and thanks to the audience.
Thank you.
Yeah.